What is up, everyone? Happy May. Very late wrap up from me, but it is what it is, and here we go. First, we've got Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was my Discord's buddy read pick for March, and most of this I read in April. And I did a live show with Abby Salter, which was super fun. Even though I didn't really love this book, it was fun to just have a live show, I guess. I mean, it was the first live show I've hosted, so that was great. And this book follows two main perspectives. One is this guy on a ship called the Gilgamesh, and it's kind of like post-apocalyptic, and his ship is trying to go to another planet to like survive and terraform that planet, basically. And they don't even know necessarily what planets they can and can't go to. But they're, just trying to figure out somewhere where they can live. And, the space travel takes thousands of years. So we get a lot of like episodic segments where we're following around this like important, vital crew member to the ship. And they wake him up and they're like, can you help us with this thing? And then like he goes back to bed, and then they wake him up later. And it's like there is a new leader who is like a cult leader basically of the ship, and then it's like they need your help with this, and then he goes back to bed, and then he wakes up again, and then like the situation just totally changes every time. So yeah, I guess that made it feel a bit episodic for me and maybe a bit slow. And then the other perspective we got was of spiders, which were on this planet and surviving, and they're like genetically modified spiders, so they're super smart. And it kind of shows how these super smart spiders who are giant evolve over time, and like what struggles do the spiders go through culturally over the period of their 2,000 years of their cultural and social development. So yeah, I mean, it's cool. It was just slow. I feel like this could have been a lot shorter of a book, but I think if you think that the synopsis I gave sounds cool, you'd probably like this book. The writing style didn't quite gel with me. It was well written, certainly, but it felt like too scientific almost. And like that sort of writing style made the more climactic moments lose a bit of impact for me. But yeah, overall it was good. Very fun to do a live show. This month's May's live show will be Guards, so you can definitely join my Discord if you want to talk about this book, and it will be hosted on my channel by myself and co-host Joanna and other co-host other Joanna. Not confusing at all, I promise. Oh, and you know how everyone uses StreamYards for their live show? I used OBS, so some people asked me about it. So yeah, definitely feel free to DM me about editing software if you're a small booktuber or whatever. And definitely give me advice too, because I can do basically anything in OBS, but it's just like a little harder to set everything up. Anyway, moving along. So I read Senlin in February, Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. And then I read book 2 and book 3 in April. So yeah, super fun. I loved both of these books more than the first book. The first book really has one character fleshed out very well, and of course that's Thomas Senlin. But then in these next two books we get more character development for other characters, and I found that incredibly fun. Not that I don't like Senlin or anything, but it was fun to just have more characters bouncing off each other. And then we also learn more about the systems of power within the tower. And I loved that more explicit world building. Like in the first book, there was a line early on that was something like, oh, we don't even know how many floors there are in this tower. And it's like, really? Why not? Is this like a dream tower? Is this some sort of magical realism thing? But then, in these books, everything becomes more explicit. And it's like, this is how many floors are in the tower. This is what this thing from the first book is used for within the tower. And then there's still a ton of questions to be answered. It's not like these books are over explaining anything or anything like that. But we're just more entwined with the sort of power structure. And the third book in particular, I want to say, definitely the favorite book I've read of this year. And this one takes place more or less in the same area, whereas the other books you hopped around from floor to floor more. In this one, the area that you're in is just so well fleshed out, Alan, in his review of this book, called the area that they were in just another character in the book. And yes, yes, that's all I could say to that. So yeah, anyway, you guys need to be reading Senlin books. They're amazing. Up next, boom, A Darker Shade of Magic, which I buddy read with people in my Discord. And I was going to do a live show for this, but alas, no live show, which is probably for the best because this isn't like a super deep book or anything, but it's very fun. And it was a good palate cleanser after like these like really profound Senlin books with like very deep themes that made me think a ton. This was just like, oh, this is a fun plot. It's very fast paced, easy to keep the pages turning in this one. I'm like somewhere between 3.5 to 4 stars on this. And yeah, the next video I do on this channel will be a review for this book, so I won't go into too much detail now. But the magic system in here was very simple, but also pretty well fleshed out. But basically, this is like a portal fantasy, and it takes place in London in the early 1800s. And there's 4 different Londons. There's Grey London, which is basically our London. There is Red London, where the magic is thriving. There's White London, where the magic is like decaying or rebelling in some sort of way. And then there's Black London, which is dead because magic destroyed Black London. And the Londons are mostly cut off from each other, but there's 2 characters who are Entari, who can like travel between Londons. The main character we follow is one of these special Entari. And he's got all sorts of cool magical artifacts. He's got like this very cool coat that gets described right away, which is awesome. And he's from Red London, so it's very interesting because he can come to Grey London, which is our London, which, is very mundane and less magical. But he can like find an item from our London and be like, wow, this is cool. And yeah, definitely more on this in my next video. Up next, boom, Lula and the Workers' Party in Brazil. Sounds very fun, right? And yeah, pretty, thin book, like 150 pages or so. So who is Lula? Well, it's this guy. He was president from 2002 to 2010. And yeah, Lula is pretty awesome overall. If we're looking at figures who are currently alive, who are kind of like, Nelson Mandela in terms of political leaders, I think Lula is definitely the best example of that. Or, he's certainly better than any of the presidents here from the United States or, Canada or the United Kingdom's prime ministers. Just, the top line of Lula's accomplishments as president are just very impressive. Getting 30 to 40 million people out of poverty, getting the literacy rate to be so much higher, and just, improving education, healthcare, and all those important social programs, public transportation. And basically, this book goes through kind of the build-up to Lula getting into office. So it starts when he was a metal worker, and, it talks about him unionizing his steel factory. And in a time where some unions existed, but they had no power, and there was like, a military dictatorship that had full backing from the United States, which was, of course, like the hegemonic power in the late 60s of, the world, obviously. But like even against those odds, him organizing the workers to fight against, the neoliberal establishment of the time was quite impressive. And, Lula's actually running for president this year. And so sometimes it's very easy to just like look at the history and look at the differences between 2 Latin American candidates and see, oh, like one of these is definitely clearly horrible and the other is definitely on the right side of the history again and again and again. And, the current president of Brazil is like super fascist. So, and he was, a general or something, or like a military leader in the military dictatorship under Brazil. That is the current president, Jair Bolsonaro. And, Lula's like a labor leader. So it's like, oh, like one of these people's probably like bad and the other one isn't. But like, obviously the records since then have been very clear who is good and who is not good. Bolsonaro is burning the rainforest. Lula has a great record of environmental protection. Obviously, worker rights, Lula is like very good. But like even stuff like the economy, which, you know, people on like the conservative end of the spectrum will always be like, oh, leftists don't know how to like do economic stuff. But there was like a whole chapter about economics in here, which one made me want to read a little bit more about economics, and two was very enlightening to the failings of the far-right neoliberal order within South and Central America. I mean, obviously mostly in Brazil in this book. And generally, when the far right talks about bad economic policies in South America, it's always one country that they bring up, which is Venezuela. But when you look at more left-wing leaders in terms, again, of economics, you look at Lula, you look at de Kirchner, or you look at like Evo Morales, they did phenomenal for the economy of their countries. And basically, you know, the far right privatizes everything. So that like, this is why you see like the Amazon rainforest burning, because now it's privatized. So if large agricultural and finance companies burn it, well, now they've got farmland. So yeah, Lula Livre. If you're in Brazil, don't forget to vote Lula. But yeah, speaking of neoliberals, boom, Augusto Pinochet, one of the faces of neoliberalism. I really didn't read this. I'm sorry, guys. I said I would, but it didn't really happen. I feel like I need to do a video on how I read nonfiction books, because it's definitely very different than how I read fantasy books. Like, I picked this up, I read a little bit of it, I put it down, but I this is like very good, and it's like very important, and it's basically the US and their involvement of destroying Chilean democracy in the early 70s, and how they orchestrated a coup in Chile to put this military dictator into power. And, you know, when this dictator was in power, he did obviously horrible things to the people of Chile, indigenous people, etc., etc. But, you know, Henry Kissinger and people in the Nixon administration and Carter and Reagan administrations, you know, they don't really care too much about that, if at all. Actually, they probably just don't care at all. But even for those like far-right neoliberals, Pinochet did things that were like so horrific even for them. And, you know, when we talk about terrorist attacks in Washington, obviously 9/11 comes to mind. But prior to that, the most like egregious terrorist attack in Washington, D.C. was orchestrated by Augusto Pinochet. So, you know, probably another reason why the U.S. shouldn't be implementing dictators in South American democracies, even if it helps some U.S. company a little bit by having a dictator in that country. It's probably better, obviously, for humanity as a whole, but, you know, even for not having terrorist attacks in the United States, if we just didn't do that sort of behavior. And, you know, some of the Biden posturing, or the Biden administration's posturing, including Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, is pretty disturbing. And, you know, Jen Psaki was the press secretary to the State Department, and she's got, you know, a very imperialist track record. The problem with these people is that they don't even like acknowledge publicly the history of, you know, U.S. atrocities and U.S. orchestrating atrocities within South and Central America.
President Maduro last night went on the air and said that they'd arrested multiple people who were allegedly behind a coup that was backed by the United States. What is your response?
These latest accusations, like all previous such accusations, are ludicrous. As a matter of long-standing policy, the United States does not support political transitions by non-constitutional means. Political transitions must be democratic, constitutional, peaceful, and legal. We've seen many times that the Venezuelan government tries to distract from its own actions by blaming the United States or other members of the international community for events inside Venezuela. These efforts reflect a lack of seriousness on the part of the Venezuelan government to deal with the grave situation it faces.
The U.S. has The U.S. has a long-standing practice of not promoting. What did you say? How long-standing is that? I would. In particular, in South and Latin America, that is not a longstanding practice.
Well, my point here, Matt, without getting into
Not in this
history,
case.
is that we do not support, we have no involvement with, and these are ludicrous accusations.
This brings us back to the Lula book, because Lula was a political prisoner in Brazil, and they actually imprisoned him so he couldn't run against the far-right fascists in 2018. And, there's some information about the U.S. being involved in that, but that imprisonment was a lot less egregious than Pinochet and the overthrow of the democratically elected government in Chile. So yeah, that was my month. Let me know what you guys think about any of those books. Definitely join my Discord if you want to read and or talk about Guards. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.